Sigoni, Sigoni, how's your macaroni?
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thanks for hanging out with me for another tutorial. Today we're going to learn how to crochet this simple gingham pillow. For this tutorial you will need 4 skeins of Lion Brand's Color Made Easy, 1 in shade, 1 in birch, and 2 in coal. You will also need some stitch markers, a tapestry needle, and a pair of scissors. Let's get started. The Cheaters Gingham pillow is worked up almost exactly like the Cheaters Gingham blanket that I posted a cal for last month. So if you'd like to make a blanket to match your new pillow, then you should go check out that tutorial as well. I'll leave the pattern link in the description box below. So first I'm going to show you how to make each of these panels, and then I'll show you how we're going to put it all together. Now for our first color, we're going to use shade. So you're going to create a slip knot, chain 8, so 1, 2, 3, and now half double crochet into that third chain from your hook. So we have 1, 2, and 3. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 3. Now go ahead and half double crochet in each chain across. So you should have 6 stitches at the end of this row. All right, so to move on to the next row, we're going to chain 2, turn your work, and half double crochet into that very first stitch and each stitch across. Now for rows 3 through 4, we're going to repeat row 2 where we'll just chain 2 and half double crochet in each stitch across. All right, and once we reach the last stitch, we're going to stop. Before we complete that last half double crochet, we're going to grab our new color, and in this case it's coal, loop it around our hook and pull it right through, and then chain 2. Okay, and if you'd like to crochet over your ends, you'll go ahead and do that by lifting the end above the stitch and going underneath that yarn. Now continue half double crocheting in each stitch across. And then of course, just like the other rows, we're just going to continue chaining 2 and half double crocheting in each stitch across. Now at the end of the 4th row of black, we're going to switch right back to gray. Now we're going to grab our first color again and pull it through just like we did before. Chain 2, turn your work, and again I'm going to crochet over this end, and we're just going to keep repeating that same row. So chain 2 and half double crochet in each stitch across. So you'll repeat this pattern for another 4 rows, and then you're going to repeat rows 5 through 12 4 more times. And in the end, you'll have 7 squares total, 4 being gray and 3 being black. So I will meet you at the end of this panel to show you what it should look like. And now that we're at the end of our last panel, we're going to tie off our work by yarning over, pulling through, and pulling that loop all the way through and pulling tight to tighten. So this is what your panel should look like. You have 4 squares of gray and 3 squares of black. Each of these little squares is about 2.5 by 2.5 inches, and so your entire panel should be about 2.5 by 17.5 inches. So you're going to be making 4 of these panels and 3 of these white and gray panels the same way. That makes 7 panels total. Okay, so now that we have all of our panels completed, you have 4 of the black and gray and 3 of the white and gray. We're going to start sewing our panels together. Now to do that, we're going to start from left to right. So grab your first 2 panels right here, put them right in front of you, and make sure that they are facing the same direction. And they are not. There we go. So we have our tail ends right here at the bottom. And if you want to weave in your ends, you can go ahead and do that. But because we're making the pillow, we're not going to be able to see the ends in the finished product anyway. So that's the good thing about this project, is we really don't have to weave in our ends. All right, so now that you have both of your panels facing right side up, and here is the bottom. So we're going to grab our handy dandy stitch markers and mark each row, or you can do every other row if you don't find it necessary to mark every row. And I really like these bulb safety pins because they're super flexible and you don't have to worry about snagging your yarn. So I'm going to mark the last stitch of every other square. Now to sew these panels together, first you'll want to measure out the strand of yarn that you'll need. I like to do at least 3 times the width of my entire panel, and then maybe a little bit extra just in case. Thread my tapestry needle, and now we're going to fold these panels in half. Start at the very bottom, go through this very first stitch and the very first stitch of the panel behind it. And then pull your yarn all the way through until you have a couple inches left. And we're going to weave this in later, so make sure you leave enough yarn for that. Now head straight into the next stitch of the next row. So still the end stitch, and then we're going to the end stitch of the next row on the other panel. Now just keep whip stitching across, making sure to keep your panels even at all times. And when you're whip stitching, you want to make sure to pull tight so that when you look at the front of it, you're not going to see much of a seam. And like I said earlier, this pattern is worked up almost exactly like the Cheater's Gingham blanket. So if you've already made that blanket, all of this probably sounds familiar. And if you haven't heard of that blanket yet, it turned out to be one of the most beautiful blankets I've ever made. So go check it out if you're interested, and I'll leave a link in the description box below. I've also included color alternatives for that blanket pattern as well, so you can make a matching pillow to go with it. So this is what your panels should look like. Oh, and don't forget to go back and weave in this end also. Now let me show you how to add on another panel. We're now going to take this panel, line it up, and do the same thing as we did before, where we marked the last row of every other square. And now that we have those all lined up, we're going to fold this panel over, grab our yarn, and measure out 3.5 times the length. Cut your yarn, and do the exact same thing as we did before. And just repeat this same pattern with all of your panels. And after you have all of your panels sewn together, we're going to create a nice little border just to make it easier for us to put our pillow together. Okay, so now that we've sewed all of our panels together, we're going to create a border for this. So we're going to take our black yarn, and I like to create a slip knot to add my new color. And we're going to start at the top right corner, so insert your hook into that first stitch there and just add on your black yarn. And now I'm going to single crochet in each stitch across this top row. And whenever you reach the last stitch, just skip over this middle part here and insert your hook into the top loop of that very first stitch of the next square. So we're just going to single crochet in each stitch across the top row. So I will meet you at the corner. All right, so once you reach this corner here, we're going to single crochet into that very last stitch, and then we're going to single crochet again into the same space, and then we're going to single crochet along the edge. So place 2 single crochet around this very first post, just to give us a nice curved border there. And then you're going to single crochet into the next space, and then into the space between the next 2 stitches. And then at the end of the next row, and at the end. Now we're just gonna hop on over to the next space here and repeat the same thing. So you should have about 6 single crochet along each square. So just continue this pattern until you reach the corner. Stitch count doesn't matter too much, just as long as your edges look pretty even. So whenever you reach the corner, we're going to place 2 single crochet along the side, and then we're going to turn our work and place 2 single crochet at the top of this stitch here. And then just like the first side, we're going to single crochet in each stitch across. And then repeat the same thing on the other side, and I will meet you at the very beginning. So now that we've reached our beginning stitch, we're going to single crochet twice into that corner space there, and we're going to slip stitch into that very first single crochet that we made. Now chain 1, and this is what our front panel looks like. So it's not exactly a perfect square. It is about 18 inches this way and 16 inches this way. But this stretches quite a bit, and because we're about to make our back panel, I made it a little bit bigger, so it's going to work out perfectly. Now let's move on to the back panel. Okay, so now that we're done with the front half of the pillow, we are going to work on the back. Now I just decided to go simple and create a plain black half double crochet square. To do that, create a chain of 45, and then half double crochet into the 3rd chain from your hook, and each chain down the row. Now I know if you're a beginner, it can be hard to see this yarn. So here are a few tips with working with darker yarn. Make sure that while you're working, you have a bright light on, whether this is your living room light or maybe even a reading light. Just make sure that you're able to see your stitches so that you're not straining your eyes. Also, if you're uncomfortable working with the black yarn, you can also use birch or shade. I think either of those will look great. And then once you make it to the end of the first row, you're going to chain 2, turn your work, and half double crochet in each stitch across. Now remember that chain 2 at the beginning of the row does not count as a stitch, so we're crocheting into that very first stitch and each stitch across. So we're just going to repeat row 2 for a total of 32 rows, and your square should measure about 17 inches. I wanted to make this one a little bit smaller than the pillow because I know it's going to stretch. And also, whenever we created the border around the panels, we made that slightly larger. And so I think 17 inches is going to be perfect. Now, once you reach the end of the row, we're going to take our scissors and yarn over your hook and pull that strand all the way through. And you can go ahead and weave in that end. And then we're going to create a border just like we did with the first panel. So to do that, we're going to reattach our yarn in the top right corner, and we're going to place 2 single crochet into that very first stitch. Now single crochet in each stitch across until you reach the corner. We're basically going to create the same border that we did with the first panel, but the only issue that I had is that because the first panel's measurements didn't come out perfectly, I had to make this back panel a little bit longer. So in doing that, it made the amount of stitches on each side of the border uneven. So if you're working it up, one side's going to come out longer than the other because it is longer. So what I did to combat this was I tried as hard as I could to get 36 stitches on each side. So I spaced it out a little bit more than I normally would have, but in the end, whenever you're sewing everything together, you're not even going to be able to notice. So just try your best to get 36 stitches on each side, but if you can't, whenever we get to sewing our panels together, I'll give you some more tips on how to make sure it stays nice and even. So I'm sorry about that little mishap, but it's not the end of the world. We can figure this out. Okay, so I ended up with 36 stitches on this one side, and that is not counting these corners. So in each corner, you should have 4 single crochet, and that will match up with your first panel. So we're just going to continue single crocheting along the border of this panel, and I'll meet you back when we're ready to join. Make sure that once you hit the end of the border that you put 2 more single crochet into that first corner here, and then slip stitch to the first stitch, and then tie off your work. Okay, so now we have our back panel completely finished. And before we bring our pillow in, we're just going to sew this top part of the pillow onto the back panel. Now to do that, remember when we were done with our border, we did not tie off our work. So we still have that loop here. Insert our hook into that same loop. I'm going to chain 1 because we're basically starting a new row. Now lay your front panel all the way onto your back panel. And remember that we made the back panel slightly longer, so it's totally normal for it to look like this. Now what we're going to do is single crochet these 2 panels together. We're going to move along all sides of our pillow and leave one side open so that we can stuff the pillow insert in there, and then we'll close it up once it's all in. So I'll show you how to do that now. Starting in this top right corner, we have our chain 1, and now we're going to insert our hook into that very first stitch here. And then we're going to insert our hook into the very first stitch of the back panel. I'm sorry about the black yarn. I know that it's hard to see, but I will try to explain as best as I can. So now we're just going to create a regular single crochet. Now just yarn over and pull the strand through both of those stitches, and then yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. So just continue single crocheting down this row until you reach the corner. And your stitches should match up exactly. But if you accidentally added a stitch or maybe skipped a stitch, don't worry too much about it. It's not a big deal. If you have an extra stitch, just skip a stitch on the other panel and no one will even notice, especially because we're using black yarn. Now, once you reach the corner, your 4 stitches on each panel should line up exactly. And again, if they're not, it's okay. Just skip over one of the extra stitches. And this is why I said that it's okay to leave these strands unwoven, because we're not even going to see them once the pillow's in there. Of course, these you should probably flip to the other side. I'm actually going to do that right now. So now that I've pushed all of my ends to the other side, I'm just going to continue single crocheting across the border. Whenever I was showing you the back panel and talking about the border, I told you that you should try to shoot for about 36 stitches per side. The reason why I said 36 stitches is because if you do this, then you'll have the same amount of stitches as the front panel. So that would be ideal, but again, if not, just skip over a stitch or add a stitch where you need to. You can also use stitch markers to line your panels up if you need to. Now, because the back panel is longer, but we made sure to have 36 stitches on each side, it lines up correctly, but it looks like it's a little bit off. However, like you can see, they eventually lined up. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now that I've reached the corner here, I'm going to chain 1 just so I don't lose my spot. And I'm not going to tie off my work. I'm going to grab my pillow insert, which is right here, and I'm going to open my hole here and just shove it right in. Make sure you fluff it out just to make sure it's in a good position, but I still think it's pretty easy to move around if you need to, even after you've already sewn it together. And this pillow form doesn't seem as fluffy, so if you get one that's not as fluffy and you'd like it to be fluffier, just add some polyfill to it. All right, so we have our pillow here, and now all we're going to do is single crochet this edge shut, and then we'll be all done. So because this thing is so giant on this table, I'm going to just finish it off in my lap, and I will show you once we're finished with this row, but don't forget we have one more row after this, so don't go away just yet. Okay, and of course, once you're done, go ahead and slip stitch to that very first stitch of the round. And you're not done yet, my friend. We still have the finishing touch to go around our pillow. But here is what it looks like so far. It's super fluffy, so it's hard for me to show you, but I will show you in the end what it looks like. Now, moving on to our accent border, so the border along the border, we're going to do something a little different. So you can either keep it this way because I think it looks super cute, or you can give it a little bit of flair. So what we're going to do for this border is create a picot edging. So the first thing we're going to do here is chain 1, then single crochet into that very first stitch, single crochet into the next stitch, and then we'll create our very first picot. So to do this, we're going to chain 3, and then insert your hook into the back loop, and the left leg of the single crochet. And then we're going to slip stitch by pulling the yarn through and through the loop on our hook. And that's your first picot. Now single crochet into the next 3 stitches and then chain 3 again, and we'll repeat the same thing. So insert your hook down into that back loop and through the left leg of the single crochet, and then yarn over, pull the loop through, and then through the loop on your hook. And just repeat that same pattern. So 3 single crochet, picot, 3 single crochet, picot, all the way around your border. All right, and you should end with 1 single crochet in the last stitch, and then you'll slip stitch to the very first stitch of the round. Now just tie off your work and you are all done. And of course, don't forget to weave in those ends. All right, so here is your finished pillow. I hope you love the way it turned out. And if you'd like to make a matching blanket, I'll leave the link for the Cheaters gingham blanket in the description box below. And that pattern also includes color alternatives that you can use for this pillow as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.